Okay, notes 3.3, bias in studies. So it says from population to sample. Conducting studies help to draw inferences about a population from a given sample. If we take a random sample of our school students and find that they work an average of 18 hours per week, we can infer that the average for the whole school is 18 hours per week. The bigger the sample, the better the estimate. So for example, let's say we randomly selected 2 students and found that those 2 students work an average of 5 hours per week. Can we infer that the whole school works a total of 5 hours per week? No, because 2 is too small of a sample. Your estimate of the population is only as good as your sampling design. So let's talk about bias in studies. A bias produces inaccurate information that systematically favors one outcome over the other. We work very hard to eliminate bias. We have different types of bias. One is a coverage bias, and coverage bias means we can over or underrepresent a portion of the population. So for example, it says, what is one way of over-representing part of the student body? Well, we could say if the population was equal to all students at the high school, but our sample was only freshmen, we would be over-representing freshmen. Then it says, what is one way of underrepresenting the teachers at our school? Well, we could say the population is all teachers at our high school, but our sample is only the math teachers. Well, if we only sample the math teachers, that means all the other teachers would be underrepresented and the math teachers would be overrepresented. Versus the other example of freshmen is overrepresented and the rest of the student body would be underrepresented. We also have a non-response bias. A non-response bias is when we cannot contact a participant or the participant refuses to participate. Let's say you send out an optional survey to 1,000 people, but only 10 people respond. That would be a non-response bias. We also have a response bias. A response bias typically is going to be people who have very strong opinions. So they're either going to underestimate or exaggerate. And I'll use the example of GPA again, okay? If you're asking people about their exact GPA, they could either answer that, okay, they don't know their exact GPA, so they're going to guess. So let's say their exact GPA was a 3.67, but they say it's a 3.8. Okay, then we have a hidden bias. A hidden bias is an unconscious attitude or association towards someone or something. We don't purposely put this hidden bias in there, but it can happen when we don't know every single participant's background in order to account for every single possible bias that could happen. Okay, we can get bias from sampling methods. So the type of sampling methods that could create bias would be a voluntary response. Okay. This is where members of the population volunteer to be in the sample. People who typically volunteer to complete surveys have a strong pro or anti opinion. Very strong opinion. Okay. An example of that is, let's say those customer satisfaction surveys that you get. I bet a lot of you, including myself, I do not answer those. Okay, unless they say, oh, answer this for a free cookie, then of course I'm going to answer it for that free cookie. Am I going to read it thoroughly and answer truthfully? No, I'm probably going to say agree, where's my free cookie? Okay, people who take those surveys seriously have very strong opinions. Either they have something they really need to say about an employee, Okay, they didn't like how they responded, they didn't like how they looked at them, etc. Or they have a opposite opinion, and it's a very positive opinion that they're just someone that just wants to express all this positivity around, and so they're going to respond to that survey. Okay, next we have a convenience sample. A convenient sample is when you sample easy to reach members of population. For example, I could survey my Calculus BC students, okay? And then whatever my Calculus BC students answer, I am going to use that to draw a conclusion about every single student at this school. Well, my Calculus BC students, majority of them want to be engineers, which means majority of all students would like to be engineers, okay? That would be a convenience sample. Another convenience sample is, let's say you need to do a survey on home mortgages. Well, instead of going out to the public, to people who actually own a home, let's say you go to a freshman class, and you're going to ask all these freshmen about the survey on home mortgages. Well, that's a convenience sample because I can guarantee you that not a lot of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, or seniors either own a home or know about home mortgages. Okay. Other ways we could get bias is by questioning methods. Okay. So we could have a leading question. This is something that prompts or encourages an answer. For example, an excellent teacher writes out formal daily lesson plans. Do you write formal daily lesson plans? Well, if you were to go ask this to your teacher, I guarantee that they would say yes because they want to be considered an excellent teacher. Another type of question would be a loaded question. Loaded questions usually contain controversial or unjustified assumptions. For example, why are women considered better caretakers for children than men? Well, this is controversial and an assumption. They're assuming women are better caretakers than men. The next one is a double-barreled question. And this is where this touches on more than one topic. So, for example, do you find that your first semester of college classes is more demanding and interesting than the classes you took in high school? And then they want you to answer yes or no. Well, what if you found something that was more demanding but not interesting? How are you supposed to answer yes or no? And then the last one is choice bias. Okay, so it's either when you limit it, your answer choices, or you give confusing answer choices. The first example says, how many total high school credits did you earn by the end of your junior year? Well, let's say you earned 15. Well, am I going to put it here? This says 10 to 15. Or am I going to put it here? This says 15 to 20. This is confusing. Okay, that'd be confusing answer choice. Okay. Let's say all of these answer choices. It says, which teacher will you come back to visit at our school after graduation? And all of the choices here are Miss Marcos, Miss Marcos, Miss Marcos, Miss Marcos. I just limited your answer choices. That means you have no choice but to come visit Miss Marcos. Okay. So let's look at some examples. Okay. In this first one, it says, for an upcoming article, a college sports writer hopes to argue that all college coaches believe wooden bats should be mandatory at a Division I level. Identify the sampling method used. The writer attends a college coaches clinic held at a local sports venue in his area. He meets with college coaches of varying levels in sports who attended the clinic, interviewing them about making it mandatory to use wooden bats at the Division I level. Well, this is a convenience sample. because he did not go out of his way to find a coach's clinic that would have majority of, let's say, baseball coaches. Instead, he probably did a quick Google search and said, well, I'm just looking what's around the corner. Oh, I see this in a local sports venue. I'm going to go check that out. Okay, so he's only asking coaches who attend the clinic. That's one. Okay, and they might have a very specific opinion about that. And two, he went to his local sports venue in his area. Okay, next one says, the sports writer emails an optional survey to all Division I baseball coaches. He does not receive responses from every coach, but works off the responses provided. This would be a voluntary response sampling method, because not everybody responded because he made it an optional survey. And the responses that he got quickly, that he made his conclusion off of, most likely contained only people that had strong opinions, either for or against making wooden bats mandatory at the Division I level. Okay, the last example, it says, identify the questioning method for each prompt. Should your school district spend less money on technology and more money on safety personnel? This is a double-barreled question. Because how are you supposed to answer yes or no if you have two opinions on each of them? So what if I want to spend more money on technology and more money on safety personnel? Next one says, like most concerned parents, don't you agree that districts spend too much money on innovative classroom technology? This is a leading question because it's trying to make these parents agree with the following statement, because I can guarantee that most parents want to be considered concerned parents. And then lastly, it says, which cultural and economic factors of the students at any school should be considered when districts are researching new technology to purchase for their schools? This is a loaded question. It's long, it's complicated, and doesn't let us give a clear yes or no answer or a clear yes, this is a key cultural or an economic factor. It also talks about some controversial things that parents might not want to mention. It could be their economic status or other things along those lines.